Whether you're a diehard sports fan, a hopeless romantic, or a comedy aficionado, the Xfinity 10G network was made for streaming it all. Worry less about buffering when streaming your favorite shows, movies, or live sports, and enjoy a better way to watch. Xfinity gives you a reliable connection for streaming, plus all the entertainment you love all in one place. Fear not, because now you can finally sit back, relax, and stream your favorite entertainment and sports like never before with the Xfinity 10G network.
Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 495 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. It is Thursday, March 2nd, 2023. Gentlemen, now it's definitely March. We heard from a couple listeners who checked in from Hawaii who managed to listen to our last episode pre-March.
By the way, it's so awesome. That was so awesome.
That was great.
And they sent screenshots. It was great.
There were two of them though, right? I think
there was two. Yeah.
We got two Hawaii notifications, so that's pretty good. I'm Sam Klein. I'm your host for this episode. I'm joined as always by Donald and Jason. So Donald, man, what's up?
It's March. I'm ready to go. This is going to be a fun week, fun weekend, fun month. This is the best time of the year.
Jason's also here.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this today. Like, I'm so excited for March and to see this team and for all of March Madness. And every year we're like that. But there's also like a little piece of me that's like, God, it feels like the season goes by so damn fast.
It's because it does.
So, yeah. So there's a little tinge of sadness that we're in. I guess it's not technically the final month of the season because the Final Four is in April, but it feels like the final month this season.
As They Might Be Giants sang, you're older than you've ever been, and now you're even older. I wanted to shout out the names very quickly. It was listener Brian and listener Lauren. Both got back to us immediately after listening to that episode that said that they were in Hawaii. And actually, Lauren did send the screenshot of he sent us a screenshot of it being Tuesday night. It was like 9:45 on Tuesday when it was still February. So appreciate you all doing that.
I love our listeners so much.
That was great. Okay, we have a few topics to talk about today. So we said we were going to be back to preview UNC, and along with that, we have one piece of news we need to discuss, which is that we speculated after the game on Tuesday that it seems like Ryan Young is coming back for one more season at Duke. He confirmed that in the press conference. So we're going to talk about that. And then I also, before we preview UNC, want to go through the scenarios for Duke as it pertains to ACC tournament seeding, because there is a range of outcomes right here. It seems like Jason is going to explain to us that Duke could go anywhere from second in the ACC. Duke could end up second in the ACC all the way down to fifth, which would have different implications for who Duke would get to play on the way to a potential ACC championship. But let's talk about the Ryan Young news real quick. So this was after the game. I guess we had missed this on Tuesday night because we were recording right afterwards. But Ryan Young basically announced that he is going to be transitioning to the MBA program at Fuqua. So he and I will be.
Sam, I don't know if I would call it announced. I think what happened was reporters were allowed in the locker. Donald, take it. Yeah, you know what's the story.
Yeah, so normally, for those of you out there during COVID and for maybe a year or two after COVID, whenever there were any post-game media availability for players and coaches, it was always via Zoom, and it was always selected players. If we won the game and Jeremy Roach had 20 points, he'd be one of the guys that would come out to be a part of the Zoom, and we would be able to participate virtually. Now this season, they have gotten back to what was pre-COVID, where after the game, people can go into the locker room and interview players. And then they come out into the media room where the coaches will have their say. But if you're on the road, it's a little different. But if you're at home, to interview Duke players, you have to go into the Duke locker room. So after the game, before John Shire got on, I was able to go into the locker room and ask him a few questions. I think I mentioned on the show that I had talked with Dariq Whitehead about a couple of things. And I noticed that someone was talking to Ryan Young, and there's some guys that, have everyone around him. Kyle Filipowski had 50 people around him. but like Ryan Young had one person talking. So it wasn't that he announced it per se. I think someone asked him a question in the media scrum in the locker room. And later on, we found out via the Chronicle, shout out to the Duke Chronicle, they listed that he had confirmed during that media scrum, someone asked him a question about returning, and he said that he was coming back.
And that the reporting from the Chronicle afterwards is that he was going to be continuing with the NBA program. So, which
by the way is not accurate. He's not in the NBA program, but
not yet.
I think
yet.
The Chronicle. I'm not sure what part of that the Chronicle got wrong. It may be that Ryan Young is planning to join the NBA program, but he's not currently in the NBA program.
Right.
Not that any of this matters. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line, the most
main part is
he's
coming
Ryan
back.
Young is coming back. Yeah.
I don't care what classes he's taking, but he's coming back.
Well, look, if he's getting a Fuqua MBA, then he's got a better connection with me than any of these other guys who go to MMS. So I care about this on a very personal level, but for the purposes of discussing his eligibility next year, yes, you are right. It is irrelevant what academic program he is in, but he's coming back next year. We speculated that might make sense for everybody involved on the basketball court because Duke is likely lighter in the post next year, given the recruits that are coming in. And I'm sure that John Shire would rather have returning second year Ryan Young than new transfer, even if you look at a guy who had a better pedigree than Ryan Young did at Northwestern, the guarantee of a guy who knows what he's doing at Duke is going to be hugely valuable next season.
I think it's interesting, right? When we first got Ryan Young, it was mentioned then that he had 2 years of eligibility. And I think even back then, last summer, we were like, hey, this Ryan Young guy can stay for a couple of years if it works out. And I think it's great, honestly, that over the last couple of years in this new era of the transfer portal, we have gotten at least one guy per year that, you can kind of say that was a successful transfer. I mean, we had Theo John last year, and then this year, I think Ryan Young exceeded expectations in some ways, right? I think when we entered the season, we thought Jake Grandison would be the transfer that would be the most successful of the trio, but Ryan Young, I think, has emerged as the clear winner of that debate. But I think also you're right, coming back next year and having someone with a veteran presence, someone who, again, has been a part of the program and knows what John Shire is all about. As we get some more freshmen into this mix, some other transfers will maybe enter this mix. But I think we're going to have, he can be one of those guys that can be a captain. He can be a leader. He's already demonstrated that on the court many times during the season. There's times where if, Jeremy Roach, who was our, lone official captain on the floor, Ryan Young is the one that assumes that leadership responsibility. So to have that return, I'm sure the coaching staff, John Shire, I think is going to be super happy about that because, again, that continuity that we talked about last week, that is kind of, the goals of this new era of John Shire, that continuity is going to continue under Ryan Young, and he will have, the leadership qualities, he'll have the capabilities, and he'll be probably a big part of that rotation, which I think is going to be great.
So I'm going to tell you something about Ryan Young. There are about 2,240 players who play enough basketball in college basketball that they are sort of qualified to get onto leader lists. They've played enough minutes that they're worth considering for various statistical awards and the such. 2,200 at latest count is 2,242. That's a lot of different players. Ryan Young is 10th in the nation, not top 10 teams, top 10 players in the nation at his ability to grab offensive rebounds, at his offensive rebounding percentage.
And he's been there all year. It's been, that's one, we've had some metrics that ebb and flow. That has been a constant all year. And also, Jason, I think earlier in the year, for about maybe through like the end of January, he was one of the top 15 in offensive efficiency too, top 15 players in the country in that regard.
Oh yeah. His numbers are ridiculous. So in addition to that outrageous offensive rebounding percentage, he's hitting 69.7% of his field goals in the season, 70% of his field goals, 19th best among all players in Division I basketball. That's insane. And let's be clear, like Ryan Young does that while taking some difficult shots. Like he's almost always guarded. He's usually putting it up from a difficult angle, with another big man on him. He has the 8th best offensive rating, according to Ken Pomeroy, which is it's a complicated efficiency metric. It's not strictly shooting percentages and stuff, but it's a measurement of efficiency. He's number 8 in the country, according to Ken Pomeroy. He's really great at drawing fouls. He's one of the top players in the ACC in terms of the number of fouls he draws, and he hits 80% of his free throws. Good God. I mean, what else could you want from a big man? I'm so thrilled that this guy is going to be back. He's not the most athletically gifted guy. By the way, he blocks a lot more shots than you would think. But he's not the most athletically gifted guy. He's not aesthetically pleasing to watch on the floor, but he gets the job done. He hustles. He's always working really hard. He plays smart. I think he's an ideal candidate to be a captain next year as well.
And for all of the versatile, big-ish guys that are coming into Duke next year, Mackenzie Mbako, Sean Stewart, and TJ Power, you could envision any of them playing next to Ryan Young in sort of different lineup combinations. So it's likely, I think, next year that Young doesn't start again, or at least that's not the plan, is that Mbako and Stewart maybe start, and that's Duke's like small-ish front court, assuming that Filipowski's not there.
I'm just going to say you're writing off Kyle Filipowski too fast. I'm not saying I know anything.
That's what I'm saying. Assuming that he's gone, said, assuming that Filipowski's not there, assuming that Filipowski and Lively are both gone, then Duke may have like an undersized-ish starting lineup with Ryan Young playing meaningful minutes off the bench and spelling whoever needs to take a breather. So he may still average like over 20 minutes a game next year, even with Filipowski on the team, but certainly if Filipowski's not there.
And I'll tell you that early in the year I wouldn't be at all, in the scenario that you're describing where we don't have a Kyle Filipowski, where Duke doesn't maybe bring in another transfer, which I think is pretty unlikely. But we have to see. I wouldn't be shocked if Ryan Young was a starter early in the year. While the freshmen, the younger big men, the Mbakos, and especially Sean Stewart, while they, get acclimated with college basketball and the physicality of it and all that other kind of stuff, Ryan Young's a security blanket. He's a great security blanket to have.
He can, step into any situation. He's the epitome of stay ready so you don't have to get ready and you always be ready. Because if you remember, right before the beginning of the season started, Derek Lively went down for a couple of weeks, and guess who stepped into his position while he was able to come back? That was Ryan Young. I think Ryan Young is going to be a guy that, like you said, Jason, he can come off the bench. He can start if he needs to. He's a guy that does not care what his role is. He will be efficient in whatever role you give him. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to having him back. I'm glad that he's coming back. And, it makes for a better Duke basketball team next year that he'll be back.
So, guys, let's talk very quickly before we get to the Carolina game this weekend. Let's talk about the situation in the ACC and the state of the conference. So when we last spoke, Pitt had not yet played Notre Dame, and we talked about how it seemed like Pitt might be the sole ACC regular season champion. But unfortunately, Jeff Capel's team lost to Mike Bray's team in a battle of former Coach K assistants. And so now the state of the ACC, and Jason, I'm going to want you to walk me through the scenarios here. But as it stands right now, Pitt, Miami, and Virginia are all tied at 14-5. Clemson and Duke are then tied for fourth place at 13-6. But of course, the tiebreaker scenarios can be somewhat complicated depending on exactly how many teams end up at different places in the loss column. So, Jason, right now Duke is fifth in the ACC. But as I understand it, there are ways for Duke to end up anywhere from second to fifth, depending on the outcomes of the games this weekend.
Yeah, it's dizzying, and I'm not sure that a podcast where we're talking through stuff is the best place for people to get this information. But the bottom line is there are 4 games that matter for Duke's seeding. There's obviously the Duke UNC game. There's Pitt and Miami. There's Clemson and Notre Dame, and Virginia and Louisville. The first thing you need to know, the most important thing you need to know is this. If Duke loses to UNC, we're the number 5 seed. Period, end of story, done. Don't need to think about anything else. We can't fall to number 6. We can't rise above anybody who's, currently tied with us or anything like that. We're the number 5. I'd rather not talk about that scenario anymore because we're not losing to UNC. We're not losing to Carolina. So let's talk about scenarios. Yeah.
I accept your decision on how to take the conversation here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So let's talk about the different scenarios should Duke beat Carolina. And the first one, and this is a little crazy, I want people to understand this is highly unlikely, but if Virginia loses to Louisville, if Miami beats Pittsburgh, and if Clemson loses to Notre Dame, then Duke is the number 2 seed, assuming we beat Carolina. Again,
what are we going to do if that happens? Like we the three, what do the three of us do if Duke gets the 2 seed in the ACC tournament here?
I mean, what are you talking about? Like, is there like some challenge that we have to go outside and run?
I guess, yeah. Like I feel like
put
email
the banner,
us,
put the
DBR
banner up.
Podcast, DBR Podcast at gmail.com.
No, wait. I am not volunteering to let the listeners
You can volunteer yourself.
Look, we're going to have to
Hill,
agree
man.
to it on air, but we're taking ideas. We're taking ideas.
Oh man,
who's we?
I'm saying we're taking ideas. I'm not committing us to anything. I'm just saying that if Duke gets the 2 seed, if Virginia loses to Louisville, come on.
Hey, everybody.
Come on now.
You could do what Sam says, but just don't be mean. Don't put us in those situations. I have to be.
Presumably you listen to the show because you like us.
Yeah, I'm going to be in Chapel Hill on Saturday, so don't do nothing that I have to do in Chapel Hill. Don't make me regret nothing. Don't make me go to jail. Short of that, DBR Podcast at gmail.com.
I'm trying not to go to jail. That's a pretty basic requirement. I don't even want really the threat of that. I think I've aged out of that.
Yeah. So this is an unlikely scenario, but it could happen. I think the most likely scenarios probably Duke ends up as the 3, 4, or 5. There, by the way, there's scenarios where Duke beats UNC and we're still the number 5 seed. The most important thing in all of this is that Notre Dame Clemson game. That's kind of the key factor there. If Clemson wins that game, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, for Duke to get higher than the number 5 seed. If Clemson wins and Miami wins, we get the number 4. So I guess that can happen and stuff. But if Clemson and Pitt win, we get the number 5. They're all kind of, again, it's just not, I don't think it's worth it to go through all the scenarios here because it would make, first of all, it wouldn't be very interesting. But it would make people's eyes glaze over. The thing I wanted to say about all this, though, I'm not, this is going to sound crazy. I'm actually not convinced that I want Duke to get the number 4 seed or the number 3 seed. And here's why. The pretty likely scenario where Clemson wins and Pittsburgh wins. I think these are reasonable scenarios. And Duke gets the number 5 seed. In that scenario, I really like Duke's draw, like in a big way, because in that scenario, Clemson's the number 4 and Pitt is the number 1. So Duke would play like a Florida State, a Georgia Tech, or Virginia Tech. Those are the teams that we'd probably play in the first round. We would then play Clemson in the quarterfinals and Pittsburgh in the semifinals. That would mean that Virginia, Miami, UNC, and NC State would all be on the other half of the draw. No offense to Clemson and Pittsburgh. 2 fine teams. I love what Jeff Capel's done this year. But if you ask me, Virginia, Miami, UNC, and NC State are teams that I fear more than I fear Clemson and Pittsburgh. So, again, in that scenario where Duke is the number 5, Clemson's the number 4, and Pitt's the number 1, which is a fairly likely scenario, I really like Duke's draw a lot.
So, for those out there, there's a lot, like Jason said, there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts when it comes to all these scenarios. But let me boil it down very simply. If you are rooting for Duke to get the double bye on set or in the tournament, obviously the Duke winning part is part of that. But if Clemson loses, we are at least a 4. That's how it boils down. Everything else kind of confuddles itself into maybe 2, 3, or 4. But if Clemson loses and Duke wins, we have a double bye somewhere on that side, and we'll be playing in the quarterfinals, and we don't have to play until next Thursday. That's the simple scenario.
On the other hand, Jason, when it comes to sort of the outcome here, and I don't want to game it out too much because it's like, what's the point of this? Let's just play some basketball games. I would like for Duke to get an opportunity for one more quad 1 win and one fewer, quad 2 or even quad 3 loss. I don't know that like outside of the first round in the ACC tournament that Duke would be on pace for a quad 3 game, but getting another quad 1 win would be great for Duke. So whether that's playing Virginia at some point, playing Pittsburgh at some point, playing North Carolina again, my preference here is that Duke gets, in addition to the game at Carolina, which should be a quad 1 opportunity, getting one more quad 1, because when you look at Duke's, looking ahead at the NCAA tournament, Duke's rating in the net, Duke's got a pretty bad record against in their quad 1 games, and those are the toughest games. Those are the ones where you're playing the best teams, and they're more of those games are going to be on the road, the way that the net is designed. But Duke has a pretty lopsided negative record in those quad 1 opportunities, and that limits Duke's seeding in the tournament. So my hope here is that Duke gets, in addition to the Carolina game, which will be a quad 1 opportunity, one more quad 1 opportunity, so that they can improve that seeding potential in the tournament. Because right now you could sort of see a scenario where like Duke loses this game to UNC, they lose an inexplicable first round game in the ACC tournament, and then wind up with a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. It could be worse than that.
It could be worse than that, yeah.
But if Duke beats Carolina, and then let's say they beat Pitt and Virginia on their way to an ACC tournament, even if it's not the winning the whole tournament, but to get to the final, Duke could end up being like a 4 seed. I feel like there's a huge range of outcomes right now, given knowing that there aren't that many games left, but that they could have a huge impact.
So as of right now, and obviously the net changes daily, right? Like every single time something happens, the net kind of changes, and every day they tell you who has moved up, who's moved down, and even where you were the day before. As of right now, because at a neutral site, which is the ACC tournament, a neutral site, 1 through 50 in the net are the teams that are eligible to be considered quad 1. And right now in the ACC, there are only 5 teams that are quad 1 at this point: Duke, Virginia, Miami, NC State, and UNC. Pittsburgh is at 55th. So it's funny, you might actually want in a way, you kind of want a Pitt to win, so that if you do play them in the tournament, they are a quad 1 opponent at that point. But also, again, as the tournament progresses, the net will change every day with those as well. So you could have a team,
and if Pitt beats Miami and Miami falls out of the that quad 1 space, but
I mean they could fall out. It doesn't really matter because Miami would only fall. The place where it would matter is whether Miami's in the top 30, and that's only whether they're a quad 1 or a quad 2. Actually, wait, on the road.
Well, but this is why it's silly to talk about, because there's
also
there's so many combinations. But
remember against Miami, when we lost to Miami, we lost so bad that they rose 9 spaces, and our win against them at home became a quad 1 win, but then the next day became a quad 2 win. So it's going to change daily. So I wouldn't necessarily focus on that, but the idea is to beat everybody in front of you. And we're going to have an opportunity to beat 1 or 2 of the top teams in the ACC if we're going to go all the way to an final ACC victory.
Last thing I want to mention really quick about all this stuff, and it's almost not worth rehashing, but I'm going to rehash it anyway. If the refs make the proper call against Virginia and Kyle Filipowski hits 1 out of 2 free throws, then Duke is currently in first in the ACC. Literally, like right now, we would be in first. We would have the tiebreaker on any one of those other teams that are in contention, and we would be in control of our fate. If we merely beat UNC, we would win the ACC outright. So just so silly that we didn't.
How do you really feel about it?
I'm pissed. I'm pissed. You're right. And by the way, Sam, in that scenario, literally the refs are costing us a seed line right now. If we had that victory at Virginia in our back pocket, Duke's seed line would be at least 1 point, 1 seed better than it currently is, and we would be in line for a top 4 seed in that scenario if we win the ACC. For sure, we would.
There's a lot of things that could have happened, right? Like even when you look at it, right? Like John Shire probably gets more votes for coach of the year in the ACC. Kyle Filipowski and some other guys might get more, first team ballots, because if you're doing this for a team that wins the regular season, then those teams usually get the benefit of the doubt with regards to the votes that they get for postseason awards. But at the same time, there are some other games where, if we hadn't made our free throws, we would have lost those games. So it's here nor there. I get the angst about going back to the Virginia game and even the Virginia Tech game. I'm still pissed about those two, but we're in the situation we're in. There's only one scenario I have left. It's go to hell, Carolina.
Or Duke could have hit 75% of their threes at Miami, and they would also be in contention for first place.
That's it.
Just so close in so many ways. Guys, let's take a break. Speaking of the games this weekend, let's take a break and talk about that Carolina game. It's, of course, the final game of the season, so we will be back to preview that very shortly. Stick around. We are back, and we are talking Duke at North Carolina at the Dean Smith Center on Saturday night. Donald Wine is going to be there. Donald, you're going to be there?
I'm going to be there. Yeah, it's a funny thing. I was telling one of my best friends from college, the last time that I went to the Dean Dome was the only time I've been to the Dean Dome, and that was back in 2004, the Duhan layup.
The Duhan game.
Yes, I was at that game, and that's the only time I've been there. So it'll be interesting to step back into the Dean Dome for the first time in 19 years.
I went to one Duke UNC game at the Dean Dome, and it was the Trey Jones game. So, yeah. or you could call it the Wendell Moore game. It was the Trey Jones affair, I would say. So that was I'd like to think that I'm 1 for 1, and I don't need to go back. I did go back for an interschool Duke versus UNC business school basketball game that was at the Dean Dome. And
was that as exciting as Trey Jones and Wendell Moore?
I was louder at that game than I was at the varsity game, I will say, because at the varsity game I was there with my dad and we were sitting and we were being polite. Was that at the Dean Dome, or was that it might have been in Carmichael?
It was probably in Carmichael.
It might have been in Reynolds.
The business school.
Was it in Reynolds Coliseum?
Anyway,
it
was in Reynolds. It was in Reynolds Coliseum.
I know. I actually do think it was in the Dean Dome. I don't remember. I'll have to find out. If anyone went to business school with me and was at that Blue Cup game, was it at the Dean Dome or was it at Carmichael? Please email us, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Let's talk about the game on Saturday, though. So, of course, I don't need to remind you, but it is always fun to remind you that Duke has already beaten North Carolina once this year. That game, of course, was at Cameron Indoor. It was about a month ago. It'll be a month ago exactly by the time they play on Saturday. So since that time, Donald, can you tell me how North Carolina has fared in the time since they lost to Duke? I see more losses on their resume than probably they would have anticipated or they would have liked.
Yeah, so since they lost to Duke on February 4th, which, Sam, as you mentioned, will be exactly a month when we hit the floor again, they've gone 4-3 since then. They lost to Wake the very next game, but they then beat Clemson after that. They had 2 losses in a row to Miami, NC State, and then they've recently won 3 straight. So the thing about what they've been doing lately, it's been weird, right? And Jason, I know you've seen some of these games too. It seems like some days they just don't like to shoot the basketball well. I mean, their effective field goal percentage has been dead last in the conference. They can't shoot 3-pointers well. They're terrible at that. Of course, we talk about this against Duke. They have some guys that like Caleb Love who will just go off against us, and that you kind of have to expect that. But I want to rehash a couple of stats from the last game that I mentioned after the game that I think are important. The last game, as we remember, was 63-57. It was the third fewest combined points in a Duke UNC game ever over the course of the history. So I'm going to remind you, of the 10 Duke UNC games with the fewest combined points, Duke's record in those games is 10-0. We have won every single one of those games. So we kind of want it to be a low-scoring affair, but it starts with the defense. They need to show up on this one, put a ton of pressure on the guards, keep Armando Bacot off the free throw line. If you remember, he had 2 free throws very early in the first game and then didn't have any the rest of the game. He had 1 more the rest of the game. He shot 3. We kept him off the line. Rebounding, we won the rebounding battle. We have to do that again. UNC is always a good rebounding team, both on offense and in defense. And hopefully, we can make some threes, because I think that's where the pressure mounts for UNC. UNC in some of these losses have had teams not necessarily shoot them out of the gym, but shoot them to the point where they have to respond. And like I said, they're traditionally not great this year at shooting threes to catch up with people. So if you're going to force them to shoot more threes where they're not good at shooting threes to catch up in the game, then you're putting a lot of pressure on them. And that's going to, again, drive the scoring kind of way down for them. So those are the things that I've seen over the last, month or so. And I think for UNC, they're obviously their last home game. They want to go out with a win against us. They want to right the ship and avenge the things. The energy is going to need to be there. And I think it will be when it comes to Duke UNC. It's always present. But I think in this shooting execution, shooting decisions are going to need to be key. Moving the ball around are going to need to be key. But at the end of the day, it comes down to 3 words: defense, defense, defense.
The one game on Carolina's schedule that I'm curious about is from last week. They beat Virginia 71-63 at home. And speaking of shooting, this was a game where I guess Pete Nance decided to put on Brady Manick's jersey or something, because in a year when Pete Nance has not been nearly what was promised to Carolina fans, he goes 4 for 4 from 3, scores 22 points, just lights up the Cavaliers. Jason, I know we were keyed into that one. Can you talk a little bit about Carolina and the shooting and any other kind of numbers that have supported their recent performance?
Yeah, their last 2 games, and I'll be very clear. We got to hope that this does not happen to us in a big way. Their last 2 games against Florida State and Virginia, they hit 14 out of 29 3-pointers against Florida State. They hit 10 out of 22 against Virginia. That's darn close to 50% on threes in each one of those games, and that's on high 3-point volume. If Carolina hits 50% of their threes against Duke, we're in trouble. I'm going to be real clear about that. But that was so out of character for this Carolina team, I can't even tell you. They're just not a good 3-point shooting team. They're one of the worst 3-point shooters in the country on the season, even including those 2 games where they hit nearly 50%. They're still only 31% on their threes, this season. And they're also one of the worst teams in the country. They're terrible at forcing turnovers, 344th in the country at forcing turnovers. So here's the crazy weird thing about Carolina. So we said, lousy outside shooting team, lousy at forcing turnovers. Do you know 2 things they do really well? They're great at not turning the ball over, and they're great at not giving up a lot of 3-pointers. So it's like this weird juxtaposition with them that, like, the things they're really bad at on one end of the floor, they're really good at that same thing on the other end of the floor. It's kind of crazy. So they're terrible at forcing turnovers, but great at hanging onto the ball. They're terrible at shooting threes, but they're really good at preventing teams from hitting 3-pointers. Not in terms of like your percentage, but what they're really good at is keeping opponents from actually even taking a lot of 3-pointers. It's also worth noting in terms of numbers and analytics, this Carolina team, we've mentioned this before, but I'm going to bring it up again because I think it is really significant. They are not a great offensive rebounding team. We've seen a lot of Carolina teams that were just dominant on the offensive boards. That is not this Carolina team, but they are a really great defensive rebounding team, one of the top 15 teams in the country at grabbing defensive rebounds. And that's going to be a key battle in this contest, because if you've watched Duke play at all this season, you know that Duke is an outstanding offensive rebounding team, is a huge part of how Duke scores points, because we're just frankly not a great shooting team. The battle between Carolina giving up offensive rebounds and Duke trying to grab them will be one of the really, really interesting things to watch in this game, and could be the determining factor in all of it. Well, last thing I've got really, really quick. I just want to ask you guys a question. Do you think Justin McCoy starts? I ask this because Justin McCoy is a senior at UNC. He plays very, very little for them. He's had an injury-riddled career. But by tradition, North Carolina, in their last home game, starts all their seniors. They would have to sit either RJ Davis or Caleb Love. I'm guessing it would probably be Caleb Love, just because RJ's the point guard, sort of harder to have him out. But I'm wondering if Hubert continues the tradition that has been at Carolina forever and a day of starting the seniors, in which case the one senior who doesn't already play a ton for them is Justin McCoy.
I think he does. I think he starts him. It's something that I'm pretty sure he did that last year. I know the Duke game wasn't the last game, home game for them, but I'm pretty sure he did the same thing last year. I was going to mention, you mentioned how they haven't been good this year at offensive rebounds. Of course, against Duke, when we played in Cameron, they had 14 offensive rebounds. We had 13. We out rebounded them when it came to defensive rebounds. We had a few more and won that rebounding battle. But again, I feel like these games are just going to be just physical, throw some of these stats out of the window because, again, Caleb Love can't hit water from a boat until Duke is on the other side. And all of a sudden he's hitting 8 threes in the game. So I strongly encourage people to take these, but also look out for everything and expect the unexpected.
And by the way, the thing I want to remind everyone, Donald, you mentioned the previous game. The previous Carolina game was Derek Lively's coming out party.
8 blocks.
Eight blocked shots. And Armando Bacot, who one of the front runners for ACC Player of the Year. I think Tyree Appleby is going to win ACC Player of the Year, but Armando Bacot is up there in the running. He's certainly going to be a first-team All-ACC player. Did nothing. Remember in that Duke game? I forget the exact number, but it was like the final 12 minutes of the game, or final 8 minutes of the game. He didn't take a single shot. Derek Lively absolutely owned him in a very, very big way. First of all, I'm going to say it. That Bacot is looking forward to having this matchup again. That he's going to have a little extra fire in his belly as a result of how much Lively dominated him last time. But that's a huge key to the game. If somehow Lively is able to contain Bacot again, Carolina is going to need to be this great outside shooting team that has shown up a couple times this year, but for the most part, they are not. If they're going to have a chance in this game.
On the offensive rebounding, the first game was one where Duke managed to pull down 33% of their offensive rebounds. I hope that, and look, you said, Jason, Carolina is one of the best defensive rebounding teams, highlighted, of course, by Armando Bacot. I'm hoping that Duke is able to notch an even better offensive rebounding performance. That's going to be a key to, making sure that you get shots and buckets against the hostile crowd.
Yeah, you mentioned the percentage. Carolina usually gives up 23% of misses as offensive rebounds. Duke usually grabs 37% of their missed shots. So 33 means we came closer to our number than they came to their number. And it's a huge one to watch. I think that 33 number, 1/3 of shots, is a good metric. If we can get to that, I'll feel good about our chances.
So, Jason, you mentioned in the last game the drought that Armando Bacot had at the end of the game. He had his last field goal attempt with 12:17 left on the clock. And for 8 of those minutes, he didn't even touch the ball. So let's be clear. I'm pretty sure Armando Bacot is going to touch the ball this time around in the last 12 minutes of the game. But it was one of those stretches where for some reason, it was a combination of UNC didn't go to Armando Bacot, but also Duke's defense on the perimeter was so effective in that game. They had to take last minute 3-point shots or last minute falling away hook shots that, made it where they couldn't get the ball into Armando Bacot in time for him to take a shot.
Duke also got Bacot into foul trouble in that first game. Bacot ended the game with 4 fouls. And so that also,
and he had him early.
Yeah. So that contributed to the difficulty in feeding him. Jason, I know you've got one more topic before we get to it. I did confirm that last year in their final home game, North Carolina played Syracuse, and they had Ryan McAdoo was one of the starters, and he was not even a role player. He was a pure bench warmer for them for 3 years. So
yeah, and let's be clear. It only means that person plays for the first 2 or 3 minutes at the most. But hey, for Justin McCoy, I'm sure that'll be a nice moment.
It's an opportunity to jump out to a lead. If I like Coach K didn't do this, but of course Roy did it, and it seems like Hubert is following in the tradition. So Duke should take advantage of that. Like if Carolina wants to be sentimental, Duke should be getting easy buckets, and we know how much Duke likes to get easy buckets at the beginning of the game. I'm looking at you, Derek Lively. All right, Jason. Give me one final point on this Carolina game on Saturday.
Okay, it does not relate to the Carolina game, but in the course of doing my research for the game, I was looking at all kinds of statistical stuff, trying to find interesting stats, and I came across a couple things that I just wanted everyone to hear very quickly. Dariq Whitehead Do you know that Dariq Whitehead is the top player in the ACC in terms of 3-point percentage in conference games? Conference games only, Dariq Whitehead is 28 of 60. That's 46.7% in ACC play on 3-pointers. So tip of the hat to Dariq Whitehead. And then I found another really cool stat. I hadn't even really noticed this before now. Mark Mitchell. We've talked a lot about his defense, that he is a great defender. Mark Mitchell is a great defender without fouling. He's one of the 40 best players in the country at fouls per minute. You know, how many fouls he commits per minute he's on the floor. He's 6th in the ACC in fouls per minute. And it's worth noting, virtually all the guys who are ahead of him are players like Joe Girard of Syracuse. You know, they play a lot of zone. They play mostly, they're guards. They play on the perimeter. They're just not in there banging bodies, trying to get rebounds and being physical on defense the way Mark Mitchell has to be as a forward. For Mark Mitchell as a forward to be one of the 40 best players in the country in terms of the number of fouls he commits is kind of an unreal statistic. So I just found that. I was like, God, it blew me away when I found that number.
And he's doing that while a lot of times, especially recently, he's been guarding the best perimeter player on the other team, right? The guy who's usually involved in most of the playmaking. Mark Mitchell has been one of those guys that have been like, hey, I'll lock this guy down. So yeah, this really.
I feel like that's been Tyrese Proctor. I think Proctor's taken, but that's not to say Mitchell's been guarding good players, and he will have I'm sure he will have an important assignment against UNC. It's possible he'll be on Leaky Black. I don't know. We'll see. It'll be interesting.
So Donald, where's the post game on Saturday? Are we going to Topo? Are we going? What's the plan?
Look, if we win, I might just go to Shooters. That might just be
that's where I think that's where everyone goes.
Yeah, I might just go to Cookout, give me some food, and then go to Shooters. So don't holler at me at Shooters. If you see me at Shooters, just give me a nod and keep on walking.
If you see Donald at Shooters, please get a photo with him and send it to us. dbrpodcast@gmail.com. I absolutely need that. And
don't be putting me in jail, man. I told you.
I would look. Well, I mean, you could be behind bars at Shooters, but it means that you're in the cage. You're not necessarily in prison.
I won't be in the cage.
The bigger problem is like good luck getting in because the line on Saturday night, when Duke beats Carolina, is usually atrocious, and you have to get there all the way from Chapel Hill. So that could be.
We don't have that clout to get into Shooters after all this time. We don't have the clout to get into Shooters. Then we've been doing it wrong.
Let me make some calls for you to see if I can get you to the front of the line. Okay, I think that's it. Duke plays UNC on Saturday in Chapel Hill. Donald's going to be there. Look for him. He'll be the Duke fan in the audience. So that's great. Although if you're on press row, I guess no Duke shirt. So keep it cool. And then look for Donald at approximately 11:45 p.m. In line at Shooters. So Jason and I will be watching from afar. You won't be able to hang out with us. That's okay. I should admit, I'm not going to be able to watch this game live on television because I'm going to be at a wedding, which is neither here nor there. But I will catch up. Don't worry.
Wait, Sam,
I'll know what's going on.
What horrible person scheduled their wedding on the night of the Duke UNC game?
Oh, just somebody I went to college with.
Oh, bad form. Really bad form.
That's why we have phones with TVs on them.
I'll have the phone. Don't worry. So yeah, I'll be paying attention. Not to worry, but I'll also be trying to enjoy the wedding. So I'll be doing my best on all fronts at all times. So stay in touch with us. Of course, DBR Podcast @gmail.com. We will be back after that game to recap it. I don't know exactly when we will record that, but we will get to you very soon after that to talk the game, to talk ACC tournament seeding, because not only does Duke play on Saturday, but almost the rest of the ACC plays on Saturday. So they'll be finalizing the ACC tournament setup, and we'll be back to preview that, etc. So for Jason Evans and for Donald Wine, I am Sam Klein. This has been episode 495 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Duke Band, take us home.
Let me me give you a big Labor Day surprise. Most people think if we all exercise the same and eat the same, we'd all look the same. And let me tell you why that's wrong. Your body is unique and your metabolism is unique. I'm Lacey Green and I'm a super trainer at Body. That's BODI.com. And you can't see me, but I don't look like your average personal trainer. I'm curvy and I'm proud of it. So I created a program for beginners only on the Body app to show people like us how to get incredible results and be our version of happy and healthy. This isn't just workout videos. It's people like you and me. It's community. It's incredible trainers. It's easy to follow nutrition and mindset experts to help you reduce stress and just feel better. And you can get started with my new program called For Beginners Only. Now, here's the big surprise. If you go to body.com right now, that's BODI.com, not only can you get everything Body has to offer at 50% off with an annual membership, you'll also get an additional 20% off, but only during Labor Day weekend. Let's do this together. Go to body.com. That's body with an I.com.